Okay, so it's round three of Hegel's Phenomenology of Spirit, and we are going to try and probably fail to cover the entirety of consciousness. Um, there are many reasons for that, but hopefully some of them will not all be due to us. I want to begin by reminding us, and by us I mean everybody watching, if there's anybody watching, and the people that are joining me down in Navigator, about why we began this inquiry and what the question we gathered over was to direct ourselves when reading Hegel's Phenomenology of Spirit. Because I think it will be helpful to give us a sort of overarching theme and bring unity to our reading of the text. Okay, so the question that we gathered over, or one formulation of the question, was can being be known? And that is the question, is knowledge the type of thing that can grasp the nature of being? Can we know what things are? And if so, how? Um, and this is an important question for philosophy because philosophy seeks to sort of make a statement about what things are, and it seeks to do so in a way that's different from other sciences. It seeks to make a sort of unqualified assertion. Um, about the nature of reality, whereas other sciences seem to limit themselves by what they're assuming. And so when we ask the question, can being be known? In seeking an answer, we want to provide the nature of being or the reality of being, and we want to show how we can know that reality, what certifies our knowing of it. That particular formulation of the question has a very epistemological slant. It focuses on the nature of knowledge and its ability to grasp this thing being. And as we have seen through the investigation of the preface in the Phenomenology of Spirit, that that's not entirely unproblematic. It gives a sort of primacy to knowing rather than being. And in doing so, it turns out that it leaves behind the sort of object. So we come to the second formulation of our question, is being knowable? And in the second formulation, we get a sort of ontological slant. The question then becomes not can knowing know being, or is knowing the type of thing that's capable of grasping reality, but rather is reality the type of thing that discloses itself to knowing? Is it in the nature of being to be knowable? Um, I was thinking about a silly analogy while I was on a walk earlier today. And the analogy was like, is being like a leopard. And like leopards are like these like privative animals. They're not social, they don't want to be seen, they hide out in caves and they wait until their prey is most vulnerable and then attack them. So is being like a leopard. Does being not want to be known? Does it want to hide away in a cave and private itself from us until the dark of night where it can get to its prey, knowing? um, the analogy is silly. It serves to highlight that perhaps being has a nature that doesn't want to be known. Perhaps it's privative. Perhaps it's disclosive. Perhaps it doesn't want to be known. And perhaps it is not the type of thing that lets itself be known. Um, that's perhaps even a valuable and interesting position to take on the nature of being. Nevertheless, the question that we're interested is it knowable? The exact opposite of what we are trying to posit. So in this case, we're more so interested in whether being sort of like a friendly cat rather than a leopard. Does it come up to you when you at it, or does it want to be known? And so in evaluating it in that way, we're asking about the nature of being. We're asking what is it to be, that sort of thing. Finally, as we've seen through the preface of the phenomenology, these definitions or these questions that try and come at knowing being or being knowable through this sort of division of subject and object, through this division of being and knowing, suffer from a very strange inconsistency. And the strange inconsistency is that we either get a knowing that is without relation to being. We get a sort of knowledge that has some form of existence, but its existence isn't the type of existence that can grasp the existence that being in itself is, or whatever that can be called. So we get a knowing that is, and in turn is not, or we get a being that is, but is unknowable as being. We get a sort of thing that exists, but it can't be grasped as existing. It just is. And so in either of these situations, we get this issue where when we posit the divisibility or the division between knowing and being, we come to a contradiction. We come to a knowing that is not, or a being that can't be known. And so the whole question itself breaks down into what we posited as a third formulation. Being knowable? Question mark. Um, and so that question seeks to identify and seeks to posit the sort of unity of being and knowing. And what I have been suggesting and what I want to suggest that is going on in the phenomenology of spirit is we're watching this apparent contradiction, or this contradiction that results from assuming the distinctness of knowing and being dissolve itself. The contradiction acts as the sort of motive force. It propels us along in the account, and we get tangled in various knots, and the tangling is itself our motivation to untangle ourselves. Um, and what I suggest we're doing there is watching how, when we assume the division between knowing and being, we come to these various impasses. And the only way out of the inconsistencies is to see a sort of point of contact of knowing and being. We see the unity of being and knowing in certain instances in Hegel's phenomenology. What I want to suggest is that when we look at consciousness this week, we look at it through the frame of being knowable, and we ask the question, where is there a unity of being and knowing in the opening sections of consciousness? And then we ask the further question, or we probe further, and we ask, are there many ways in which being and knowing are one? Or is there only one way? That is, are there many points of contact for knowing and being where they come to reflect one another or be essentially the same thing? Or is there only one real way in which knowing and being come together? A question which we inevitably will fail to answer since we're at the beginning of the text. And if there are many ways, taking this assumption as primitive, what are they? So, what I want to suggest and what I want to leave as sort of kindling to be sort of lit by Avida and Dan, if they can help me out on this investigation, is what are the ways that being and knowing appear to coincide in consciousness? Are there any moments in consciousness, that is the first major chapter of the phenomenology of spirit, where we see a clear coming together of being and knowing? And if we can say what these are, what have we learned about being and knowing? Or what offerings can we present as a first formulation of an answer to our question?
Mm. I think I'll put myself forward as a foil for the conversation. Um, I'm going to, I'm going to, and it's not true because I think I stand where I am. So I'm going to be going on. I'm going to keep coming back to sense certainty. So in terms of that last question, I'm going to say pure immediacy of sense certainty. Um, but I think in terms of a role, I'm going to be uh, yeah, a foil. I'm not sure what that means just yet. So that languaging of being and knowing, maybe like to if we put that in the context of sense certainty, the thing that is or purely is, but I'm not putting any helpful direction here. Let's just say where my role is, and then maybe that first instance is the pure immediacy of sense certainty, where being and knowing first touch or are together. Um, yeah.
Okay, well, let's take it from the start then. I think it'd be valuable to say more about the being and knowing touching at the beginning of sense certainty. Like, what's the point of
Uh,
contact? What else? I mean, these are all rhetorical questions. What's the being in sense certainty? And what's the knowing? You know?
yeah. It's the just it's just what simply what simply is. But then what side does that fall? It's almost like it's not a point of contact, it's a pre-differentiated state.
Yeah, as soon as we try to assert that they're a point of contact, we see that they're different. So like what I what I was trying to get at was so in sense certainty, we have the sense certainty is the knowing, right? Sense certainty is the knowing employed. Um, we have sensation, and it's a sort of cognitive activity. And whatever that cognitive activity is, I take it to be sort of a knowing or an acquaintance with being, right? And the being that we're acquainted with right at the beginning is a being which is immediately. It's a this, is how he describes it.
And I.
Yeah, let's see. Yeah,
So
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 this,
so I think sorry, uh the framing of being knowable or being a knowing, then like uh I think I'm just putting coordinates out. Like so subject object framing might be good because then it like shifts around a few times as to where the being is or where the thing that can be known is. So the assumption always that the uh or yeah, that movement between the I as the knowing and then also the I as being. So am I trying to know the being of the object? Then what am I if I'm trying to know the being of the object or know the object? So what's available in the object to be known? And then like where's the being? Where's the knowing? The way that there's I and there's subject and object, and then there's something that happens between them.
hmm,
Yeah.
Avida, any thoughts, any coordinates, any helping mapping that you have in mind?
I want to say it's the last part. Something about the last part and moving into self-gathering touch self-consciousness yet is suggesting that there's something happening with the consciousness itself that to me, in a way, kind of it holds out hands for being. I want to say, I don't want to say it is being. There's something happening there with a reflection into self. Uh, like I said, that last section for me and the bit on flux and forces really are not. But I think there's something in it. There's something happening with the consciousness itself and
Hmm,
the understanding as a mediated move of consciousness towards itself
hmm,
to grasp something of truth, I want to say. But all of this is happening inside. I see all three moves as moving from an outer, a middle to an inner, but the same three steps as being inside. I don't know what to tell you, but number three, box number
yeah, that's fine. I think that's maybe the point where knowing and object known or knowing and being come together most clearly. Like, I think you're right. And I think that we won't be able to get an adequate account of it, but to sort of spoil the first section, to get ahead of ourselves.
Oh, sorry.
No, it's fine. It's just that we won't be able to do it justice. Like, I'm gonna say it, but and I think we should hold it in mind as a sort of target to hit. Um, that the unity that you're pointing to is the unity of becoming self-conscious. So at the last phase of force and the understanding, again, I'm not too familiar with what the actual move is, but there's a moment right at the end of force and the understanding where the object changes from an object as sort of the unity of perceptual moments, which it is in perception, into a self. We It turns out that the object under investigation was ourselves all along, and so there the knower is the one investigating, and the object known turns out to be a knowing, which is self-consciousness. And so this knowing investigates itself. And so knowing and being, the knower, the investigator, is they exist as a certain character, and they're inquiring into the knowing, but that knowing is itself. And so it becomes a sort of self knowledge or self consciousness. And that self awareness has a sort of unity of being and knowing. It is both a knowing that is, a knowing that exists, and a being that is knowable. It's a something that knows it. And that's like the maybe the most intense so far, at least for us that I've been reading, point of contact between being and knowing that we get. But to put a spanner in the works and then to return back to where we were, if that were the final stage, or if that were the complete unity of subject and object, or knowing and known, or being and knowing, whatever we want to use as terms, why go on to reason? Like, that's the third section of the phenomenology. There's still a further development that needs to happen. So, and what's the further development? We've gotten a being that's knowable and a knowing that exists. What more is there to do? I don't know if I'm putting the question well enough. Anyways, the return that I want to suggest is that we aim at self-consciousness as the point where knowing and being come fully into contact, um, as the end of our project for today, or for whenever we complete
Mm.
consciousness, completing consciousness. But we start
Yeah.
at sense certainty because I think
Yeah.
there's a moment of contact between being and knowing that's already happening in sense certainty.
The completion of consciousness takes us to self-consciousness. That's our goal. So
Yeah,
maybe Hadley, like you did a very good mapping of the movements in the moments of consciousness from sense certainty into perception and from perception into understanding. I think just like a little map of that progression, and then we get into sense certainty. In sense certainty, I really want to get a sense for the kind of functional concepts, like what is a universal, what is a negation, or what is negation, what is the negation of negation, and then how is it that what something is involves what it isn't. So just like a really share a sense of the key functioning concepts. Do you guys agree with like a general plan way forward?
I think that sounds good. Um, One thing that I want to add is once I've done a brief recap of the sort of transitions, um, it might be useful to, even though this is not a reading group, try our hand at some of the arguments, because I think some of the arguments will clarify those key terms or help us
Yeah,
understand the functionality of those key terms that you're pointing to.
yeah,
Okay, so let's talk about structure quickly and then why we're aiming at what we're aiming at. So earlier, Avile said that the point of contact would be self-consciousness for the unity of being and knowing. And so I just want to spend like a minute more just dwelling on self-consciousness as the point of contact. Okay, so why should self-consciousness be the point of contact? Well, self-consciousness is an instance where the knower and the being that is known are identical. That is, the knower is a consciousness, and what they're investigating is a consciousness. And so, in doing so, they're investigating themselves. But in the self investigative moment, not only is the knower trying to know itself, but it is a certain type of thing. It is a self consciousness. And so, what I'm trying to point at, and what I think is often missed in the sort of Cartesian, I think, therefore I am, is that it is, I am. Self consciousness exists. It has a certain sort of existential character to it. Um, it has a sort of ontological dimension to it. It is a type of being. And the being that it is a type of being that knows itself. It's a knowing being, if you want to put it that way, or a being knowable. It's the third formulation of the question, being knowable, but rather than with a question mark at the end, a full stop. Being knowable. That's what it means to be knowable, to be a self consciousness, to have insight into oneself, to look into the
Mm.
self that one is. And so I just wanted to emphasize that as the sort of point to aim for, because it's the first real instance of a being that is knowable or a knower that exists.
So just a foil. Um, the in listening to Hadley, the it seems like one of the a fundamental thing is motion. So as soon as it seems like we've arrived somewhere, that's exactly the point where the next motion comes in. So like intrinsic to the thought is this movement. So like the very arrival at somewhere where like what I don't know what would be understanding would want to solidify the thing that it's got at because its emotion is inherent, the next step is implied. And then so I don't know, just to
The
put like in terms of yeah.
the fancy way of saying it, and the I guess the I'm reverting into the Larry that is in all of us. The fancy way of saying it, and the philosophically more interesting way to put it, is that Hegel thinks that concepts are dynamic. Like that's the big this is the big
Okay. So
differentiation between Hegel and Kant.
I
Like
don't want to. I think our plan is good, but this might help get us at one of the key concepts. Like, why is a concept dynamic? My hunch is that it's because part of what it is what it is not, or like negativity constitutes what a concept is, constitutes what it is.
cool. I guess
Now,
we'll find out together. Um,
yeah,
is the thing. I think the point where that really comes into focus is in the section titled "Force and the Understanding," because he defines the concept there, and he defines it as a sort of dynamism, um, wherein there's a distinction made, but it turns out to be no distinction at all. Um, so concepts distinguish, but they distinguish by virtue of being no distinction. Anyways,
yeah.
that's
I think our plan is good. I think our
that's
plan,
that's
yeah.
where we want to end up at, and that's kind of what we want to see and explain how that works. But um, for now, at least, let's quickly focus on why that's interesting, and then let's
Sorry,
do.
sorry. Yeah, yeah. So the you said the distinction, but there's no distinction. They seem to have distinction and there's no distinction. Yeah. Say it again, phrase it again.
Let's try and talk about the distinction between Kant and Hegel quickly, and dynamism and
Okay.
static concepts. I hate to do this, but I think it's maybe the best way to do it. And then let's talk about
You
what
love to do it. Yeah,
okay,
yeah,
so Kant and Hegel, right? For Kant, concepts are the immediate universal characteristics of our cognition. They are they always go through another process and they always refer to something else, and they're universal. They don't apply to a particular. They are doghood or something like that. It's completely general. Um, and so in order to refer to something, they need to refer to another representation. Anyways, long story short, the basic concepts in Kant's thing are the categories, and we can apply the categories to anything that exists because um, basically the categories are unchanging. Um, like I think his one of the categories is substance, and the characteristics of substance is to persist. So everything that persists can be called a substance, and that's because there's this like static web that we sort of can cast over our representations. Hegel gets that, and I think he sees that, but he also sees that there's a problem with it. Kant's concepts never pick out an individual. They apply to all things, but in doing so, they don't apply to anything, right? That's the issue. The concepts are completely general. We can apply them to anything, but in doing so, they don't really apply to one particular thing. They apply to no thing. So this is at least one of the sub problems that I think Hegel is dealing with. His issue is that it's the static nature of Kant's concepts that allow them to be universals. And it's that same static nature that allows them to apply to anything, but it's also that same thing that undermines what they're supposed to do, to individuate, to pick out something and then describe it.
So
Hegel, I think, notices that concepts not only apply to stuff, but they apply to things. Like when you say dog, like it's not just some general webbing that you throw over and it applies to like several particulars, but it also picks out this dog. And in so
this is
doing,
this is where
it
this is
has
where I
to,
think sense. Sorry to interrupt. I think this is where sense certainty saves us because Hegel gives a different account as to how the thing comes to be universal, and part of how it comes to be universal is the negativity in it, and then so it puts the negativity, which puts the motion into the concept. So like the our desire to get at how sense certainty or at the movement in sense certainty will get us that sense of how Hegel comes to is concept at perception, is it at that moment that it comes?
yeah. So I think not only will we be able to see why Hegel's account is different from Kant's, we'll be able to see why his account of universality, I think, is different from Kant's. Uh, it's the words are the same. We use the same words, concept and universal and stuff like that, but I think they mean different things. But I don't think they mean different things because Hegel is just saying a different word. I think he's well aware of Kant's usage of these terms. And I think what he's doing is sort of redefining these terms. And I
Yeah.
think his
Uh,
redefinition is an attempt to make the terms better, more accurate, to
yeah.
reflect reality in a
Yeah.
more serious way. So one of the questions we can ask is, should concepts be dynamic? Right?
But so then I think Hegel's saying in the sense certainty thing is he's like saying it arises from sense certainty itself that this dynamic nature is revealed. Like as soon as the pointing comes, which introduces a negativity because you point to a thing, and then with like the example of the now, so now, which is just as what now I point to it. The second truth comes in that there was a now that has been. So then part of what this now is, okay, that's where I'm tripping up in the movements because like there's the initial way he comes, he says like now as night and then now as day. So the now that's either day or night, both day and night, indifferent to day and night.
He's equivocating to answer you shortly, to like to be sorry to just like throw it there, but he's equivocating between the usage of the term now. Like one of the difficulties of this section of sense certainty um, is his usage of equivocation. But it's not just equivocation for equivocation's sake. There's a difficulty in Hegelian
Yeah.
equivocation because he switches from now as individual and now as particular, as an immediate singular thing, the now of sense certainty, and shows that when we take the now of sense certainty seriously, we get to this now that has been, the previous now. And so once we point at it, now is, right? So it's an immediate singularity. And then we say now, but now is not. It has been. And so it turns out to be a sort of mediated singularity.
Yeah,
But
but
then
it's
noticing that it has been and that it's not now, i.e., it is now turns out to be a universal because it's now whether it's now turns out to be indifferent to its immediate the thing that we're pointing at and the thing that
yeah.
was pointed at. It turns out to be both and. So in a way, it's equivocal, but
But
it's
yeah,
equivocal in the sense that the lower order definition of now, or now as particularity, or now as the now of sense certainty, turns out to depend on the now that is universal, or the now of perception.
the isn't it that the process of pointing comes, we then get to the truth of now.
Yeah.
So it's like it's and that's what I'm trying to point to, like the way that it comes to be a universal and then what the universal is. And then so it seems like that's where negativity is functioning. So then it's not just the that the way in which negativity then functions then is going to be essential to our understanding of the movement in later instances, because it's like it's important that it's a movement into the universal, and then the universal is something like what, like a relation, pure relation, or like a uh, uh, there's like a mediation in it. So the truth of the
Yeah.
now, yeah.
I think one way of putting it, just the way that popped into my mind at the moment, was like the nowness that we arrive at, the universality, the concept of now, the true meaning of now, uh,
The
is a
truth,
yeah, is
because meaning's not there yet. Yeah.
yeah. It contains its negation, or it's a it's a self negation. Like it has its negation within it. And it's a self-sustaining negation, is what I meant to say. Um, because it's not night or day, it's now. And so in containing that not night or day within itself, it's sort of a self-sustaining negation, or a negation that does not undermine itself in the same way that the particular now that we started off with failed to
Yeah.
contain itself confronted with negation.
It's self-identical, but it only comes to be self-identical because and then I think like that's where just my mind goes, like the negativity, that there's something that it isn't, or that like so that yeah, I keep coming into that. Maybe I'm wanting like the argument for why that is the case, like what that movement is to get to the universal of sense certainty, or
Okay, let's get there. Let's finish what we started with and get there. Nah. Um,
the power
so
of Nana.
yeah, Avile, interrupt while we can still be interrupted, I guess.
Just a 2 second interruption. Is this not the section in the bit on sense certainty that is, what did we say, the touching of being with, I forget the other term,
And knowing.
No,
and
people
knowing
that
things.
your speaker.
Is this not the bit where there's a touching of being and knowing? I think the initial question was where in this first part consents to a certainty, do we have almost a prefiguring of that touching motion? It
Yeah.
feels to me like that might just be it. I'm happy to be wrong.
I don't think you're wrong. I think that is, I think just after the now, or in that just after the, I'll tell you what I think is the touching. Not that I'm right, but there's a particular section where the touching becomes like very immediate. Um, it's at where is this? It's at 104, I think, towards the bottom. Um, and it's just after, so the basic motion in sense certainty is that it goes from objective, this is because it is. We'll talk about this more in a moment. And then it turns out to be, this is because I am. Uh, it appears hot to me, and the being of this thing appearing hot to me depends on my perceiving it to be as such, or my being appeared to as such. And then finally, we come into a relationship with being and knowing, or the object and the I. And he says, on the contrary, I am a pure brackets act of intuiting. I, for my part, stick to the fact that the now is day, or that the here is a tree. Also, I do not compare here and now themselves with one another, but stick firmly to one immediate relation. The now is day. Why I think that's important is that he delineates what the I is. I exist as a pure act of intuiting. I am intuition. It has a particular be and a particular form of knowing, intuiting. And then the being is the being for intuition. I am an act of intuiting because something is, and it is because I am an act of intuiting. That's the third and final stage of sense certainty. I think I'm not doing it justice now. But yeah, it's I am, or I exist as an intuiting being because the object is, and the object is because I am an intuiting being. It it sort of
Yeah.
presents itself to me because its nature is to present itself to an intuiting being, and I intuit it or receive the object because I'm receptive. And that's the sort of point of contact. And the now as the universal is the development of that point of contact, I think. Okay, before we get there, let's try to run to the end of sense that we've been setting targets. I think in the language of setting targets, self-consciousness is the big target that we've set as our true point of contact between knowing and being. Let's now set um, pure intuition and the object of pure intuition, whatever that might be, as our target for sense certainty.
Mm.
And then let's do what we said we were going to do, which was
Mm.
finish off this Hegel Kant comparison and then transitions.
Mm.
Okay.
Yeah.
Wherever the hell the Hegel and Kant comparison was, I think it was in the dynamism of concepts and the static nature of concepts. Basically, that's going to be a major point of interest, at least for me as someone who's interested in Kant, and seeing why concepts are dynamic and how their being so is related to the type of being that conceptualizes, I think will be interesting. Because just as I am the pure act of intuiting and sense certainty, it turns out that in understanding, we need to step into the place of the concept and be the concept that develops itself. I can't remember where this passage is, but let me just have a quick look see. Um, oh, yes, it's at 133, where we have to step into the place of the concept and be the concept that self develops itself. This truth follows its own essence, so that consciousness plays no part in its realization, but merely looks on and simply apprehends it. To begin with, therefore, we must step into its place and be the concept which develops and fill out what is contained in the result. It is through this awareness of this completely developed object, which presents itself to consciousness as something that immediately is, that consciousness first becomes explicitly a consciousness that comprehends or understands its object. So I take it that these moves, and we'll probably try and talk about it a bit more in sense certainty, is another place where Hegel distinguishes himself from Kant, but that's maybe not the interesting point here. In both of these places, in sense certainty, where we are an act of intuiting, and in understanding, where we become a concept, we sort of, I don't know how to say it in the way that it's meant to be impactful. We exist as an act of pure intuiting. Like when I sense stuff, or when the now is day and I stick to that, when I am present, like when I let the world happen to me, um, I am and I have a particular type of being. Daniel earlier, before we were recording this, was talking about how like babies experience this is, and like a baby could be thought of as like the being of sense certainty. Like it experiences of this, and babies are better at being the type of being that is in sense certainty than adults are. Adults are always trying to define this. Like we're like, this, what are you talking about? It's this thing. But then we've slipped into perception already because we're adults. We we want to know what the thing is, and we've already moved on in our sort of developmental degree. But what I'm saying here, what the point that I'm trying to make is not that we're not babies, but rather that to be to be the type of I that exists in sense certainty is to have a sort of existential or ontological status. We exist. What are the type of things that we are? I exist as a pure act of intuiting. I am receptivity. I am I am the being that receives or that being presents itself to, is the conclusion of, or what we're suggesting is the conclusion of sense certainty. And then somehow through perception and getting to understanding, I become a concept. I'm going to leave that open because it's a silly sounding sentence. And I think once we fill out that silly sounding sentence, it won't sound so silly. What does it
Yeah.
mean to become a concept? What does it mean to become a pure act of intuiting? What's the difference between being a pure act of intuiting and not being there? Like, so we're talking about transitions, and we're going to talk more about the transitions from each section in consciousness. But for the moment now, we've mentioned a transition from the beginning of sense certainty, where I exist as a this, to the end of sense certainty, where I exist as a pure act of intuiting. And what's the difference between existing as a this and a pure act of intuiting? Is sort of the question that I'm asking.
Mm.
How do we fill that out? Like what in us changes, and what do we recognize that lets us be a new being unto ourselves? It's not only our relationship to an object that changes, but our relation to ourselves. And in that relation, we become something new. It's like, to just to dwell on it for a little bit longer, because I don't know how to make the point that I'm trying to make. It's like we were the bud that's blossomed into a flower. The the germinal seed has become something completely different and now exists as a completely different type of thing. So too, what I'm suggesting is that when we were just at this, we were just the seeds of sense certainty. But once we flower into a pure act of intuiting, we take on a completely different role in the world. We are something different. We're not just thinking of ourselves as something different. We're not just, what I'm trying to emphasize, and what I will be trying to emphasize this whole series, is that when we're thinking through Hegel, we're not thinking about what we are becoming something different.
Mm. Mm. Yeah. Yeah. That's what makes it difficult because you can't fix it. So like the the way that I'm thinking of the pure or of the act of pure act of intuiting,
Mm.
that pure, it's a pure relation. So then it's like how does that relation become um that's where this like this thing of the understanding the function of the negation or of the otherness in the thing, because that's what moves us from the oscillating between the I and the this, or between the object and the,
Is
because
is it sorry, so you're saying that it's a negativity in the thing that takes us here. There's a negativity in the object or the being, and that negativity propels us to realize that we're the pure act of intuiting.
I think the negativity is found in both the, well, he goes into now and here specifically,
Mm.
but those were instances of uh this.
Mm. Okay,
Uh so it's more like
I
um
was going to just to sorry to interrupt. I was
mm,
going to say that the negativity is in uncertainty, but now you've brought me to think that it's in both. So like, let me just say more about the negativity and uncertainty. The negativity and sense certainty that I've been suggesting and will continue to suggest is that sense certainty takes its object to be a this, and it takes it to be an immediate particular this. The this that confronts us in sense certainty is supposed to be uh, immediate, and it's supposed to be individual. It's supposed to be pure being. But then sense certainty turns out to be mistaken about its object, right? It turns out that this has, even in its most primitive shapes, here and now, it turns out to be universal. And so the negativity is not in the this, or the negation is not in the this, but it's a sort of correction of sense certainty's conception of its object. Sense certainty negates itself by realizing that it mistook its object or misunderstood itself. But now that you said that the negativity is in the object, this does contain a negativity, right? This, this, when we try to write it down or preserve it in its most primitive forms, now and here, or to bring the Kant back into it, space and time as pure forms of intuition, um, we come to see that when we say now is day and we try to keep that meaning fixed, now changes into night. And so now loses its truth by becoming something else. And so it also contains its own negativity. And here, this is the interesting point why I wanted to interrupt. Here again, the negativity is in both the knower and the known, or the object and the knowing. Here we come into another point of perhaps we could say this a bit differently. Perhaps we come into a point of contact between non-being and knowing, or something like that. There's a sort of identity between, there's a sort of knowing and being that are identical in that they both contain this negation. But insofar as they both contain this negation, they are not.
the so the it seems that like the ish the because it's pure relation, that act of intuiting, and the universal is pure relation. The negativity seems to function in a way to establish or make possible pure relation as something. So then the way that like so the way, because it helps us come to the truth of, say, now. Like sense certainty is aiming to its truth, which is the universal, and then when the being is um to be over, it's not quite the right like languaging, but to be over the universal is to be perceiving. and the universal is always like this here or here now. The universal is here now. It's the space time.
Yeah, so I think maybe I can offer a sort of resolution, offer a role for negation. Okay, so let me try my offering and let's see if this works. So I think the reason why we're struggling so much is because we're just using these terms and we're not noting their particular point in the text.
Yeah.
So I exist as an act of pure intuiting is the end of sense certainty, and then um, the being that is at the beginning of sense certainty, and then through this development we come to a being that has a certain nature. Anyways, long story short, the negation removes the sort of blemishes of the initial conception that we started with, right? So at the beginning of sense certainty, the object is meant to be a this, and the this which it's meant to be is meant to be immediate and singular, right? It's meant to just be this. And then through the investigation, so the I presents itself as a this, and the object presents itself as a this. And the object is the one that we undertake first because it seems to be independent of the knowing or the I. So like the object can be, but the I can be or not be. It doesn't have to be. Then when we investigate that, the object, that's your first discussion of now, which is at 96, when we write down the truth of now. We say the now is night, and we write that down. And the truth can't lose any of its value by being written down. But then we look back at the piece of paper later on in the day, and it turns out that the now is day. So the truth becomes stale. And so we realize that the object that was meant to be a this, the particular this that was meant, isn't actually, or it is not. And so it turns out that it only is to the perceiving subject or the I. But then the I takes it in. It is now to me. And the existence of the object now depends on the I, right? It is now to me. It is now because now appears to me. In that sense, the I is still a particular me. I experience the now happening.
Mm.
But Hegel says, and this is the second part of the argument, there's like three big arguments. This is at 101. The force of the truth now lies in the I, in the immediacy of my seeing, hearing, and so on. The vanishing of the single now and here that we mean is prevented by the fact that I hold them fast. Now is day because I see it. Here is a tree for the same reason. And here comes the kicker. But in this relationship, sense certainty experiences the same dialectic acting upon itself as the previous one. This I, see the tree and assert that here is a tree. But another I sees the house and maintains that here is not a tree, but a house instead. Both truths have the same authentication, the immediacy of seeing and the certainty and assurance that both have about their knowing, but the one truth vanishes in the other. So being is because I perceive it to be, but when I really think about it, not only am I different from myself at different moments, the now is day, but then the now turns out to be night later on. Both to me, I stop holding them fast. But also you as an I, as a type of thing that is an I, can say something different. I can say, here is Dan while pointing to my screen, and you point to your screen. You say, here is Hadley. Or we both point to the same patch of white and we say, this is white, this is black. And they get the same authentication. But that authentication turns out to be no authentication at all because it is not the truth of the one vanishes in the other. It has the same degree of certainty. And so it must be equally as true that it is white as that it is not white, which means that it can't actually be that way. And so then Hegel goes on to develop, this is a long exposition of the point of negation. Hegel goes on to develop that what does not disappear in all this is the I as universal, whose seeing is neither a seeing of the tree nor of this house, but is a simple seeing, which though mediated by negation of this house, is all the same simple and indifferent to whatever happens in it. That's the one that I was talking about as just a presencing. Like, it's like almost like being in a state of meditation. Like I just let the world happen to me. Um, I walk and the colors shift and the trees pass me by and the world just happens to me. I just let it be. And in letting it be, it happens to me. In that, we come to see that the I is a universal. So, what I'm saying is, once we've passed that, then we come to see the I and the object in relation. That's the act of pure intuiting and the object intuited. But what I'm saying is that the function or the role of negation in sense certainty is to erase the misconception of the object and the I, of being and knowing, present in sense certainty at the start. The misconception being that they are immediate and singular, when in fact they're both universal. I am a universal, and being is universal.
Yeah. Yeah.
So the
And
negation is sort of a taking away of a blemish.
yeah. Yeah. And it reveals the universal. It brings us to, it's like a
Yeah,
progress. And the
yeah,
universal is the here now.
yeah,
Yeah. And then it's this pure relation, or it's like it's a plurality. It's a simple complex. It's a simple entity, or it's a uh because it's indifferent to day, night, tree, house. And that's that receding into into the universality.
yeah. One way to think about that is also it's not day, it's not night. It's
Yeah,
neither day nor night.
that was the
It's
piece I think I kept like putting that it's the introduction of the negation. Like the plurality, the universal as something plural comes to be by recognizing that there's always it's like constitutive, the negation, that it's not that it that it is not means that it can come to be. um yeah, I guess that's where it's like it's sticking. It's like the how is something constituted by a negation? Because that's how we get to the universal of the thing as the as being plural.
I want to say this came out to me when I was reading the section in the I think it's in perception, where he transitions from one to the broken up one to the many less one. So just to explain the transition briefly, in perception, the object is a thing, and so in being a thing, it's one thing. Salt has a certain number of properties, whiteness, tartness, etc. But the whiteness and tartness is not a manyness, it's one salt, or whatever, however you want to call that. It's one thing. It's the thing that unites all these properties. Then in the perceiver perceives the salt. It looks white to me now, and then it tastes tart to me later, and it feels brittle to me. And all these things are a broken up one. The one that is the salt comes to be broken up into its properties by my body as the universal medium, which is also just something that Hegel throws in there.
Yeah.
Um, and then my apprehending it through the body as this universal medium, uh, I come to realize that the mistake is not in the thing, but in me. And so I put it back together as a one. I recognize or have this recognition that the salt is one, and it's the one that is tart, that appears tart and white and brittle to me.
Yeah.
And by putting that back together, it becomes the many less one. So here's the kicker about your negation thing. It's a sort of freedom or a sort of self-determination in in coming to negate the negation, or in coming to have that first moment of negation. We we notice something that is there but sort of doesn't belong, and then we remove the constraint. And in removing the constraint, we let the thing be what it's supposed to be. We remove the constraint, and in removing the constraint, the thing is able to construct itself as what it's supposed to be, is what I'm trying to posit. It's a sort of
Yeah.
self-determination or a freedom from.
Yeah,
The role to free it.
use the language of like a blemish that you take off. So
Mm.
so there it's a maybe that's the direction, but the it's this piece that I think is striking me a lot is the idea of universality and medium, or universal medium, that the universal is in some way medium. So its universality is in its medium-like nature, or its mediumness is the, and then it seems to that, like for it to be medium, like there seems to be something important about its negating. So
It's
it's
neither just one over many, or it's not the many either. It's in between. It's the medium.
yeah, it's like this thing is uh salty, also tart, also round, or whatever. And then the also is not. Or where's the not? Like it's um or okay, in that instance, the tartness is not the other property, is not the other property, is not the other property. So then the from what I said, then the, the negativity isn't in the alsoness. But then is that true? How does it function as medium? Or how does it because it must be something like I went for like a pure relation, but it must it must have a negating, or like it there must be something that is not. Like there's tartness, then there must be something that is not tartness, and that is not just is not saltiness, and is not roundness. Like there's something that tartness is not, that saltiness is not, and yet they are, because it's that they cohere, or that they also.
Maybe bring that out to like the opposite of tartness. I don't know. Maybe the opposite of sour is sweet. So sweet is not sour, sour is not sweet. But then the also has to be neither sour nor sweet, or something like that.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah, okay, so if we have opposites, then one opposite is not its opposite, but they are together in that they are opposites. But then if we're thinking about a thing that might have sets of opposites, or one instantiations of the opposite. So the sweetness is not sourness. It's not saltiness in a different way to the way it's not sourness, I think.
Mhm.
And then it's not it's not the thing. It's not the also. So there's three is not there, it seems.
Mhm.
So then I think like the thing I keep coming to is like, what is the role, like how is the also and the universal, how is negativity constitutive of it, or functioning in it, or yes.
Abile, you wanted to say something before?
I've been thrown into confusion. I'm realizing maybe I didn't understand that section. I thought Hegel was saying what Dan was saying before, that these properties, the tartness, the whiteness, the cube likeness, or something of that sort. The negation lies in the one not being the other. Maybe I'm not making sense here. So the whiteness is whiteness and is not darkness. That's what I understood in my mind. So that when they're contained in one thing, they're the also, which is why they can be put back together as the thing that they were before.
Yeah, so I'm also more with Avile, I think, than I am with you, Dan. Not that this is a battle or a fight between friends, but I also sort of
Appropriate
understood,
opposition.
Yeah, Hegel was saying that these things contain their opposites. Like whiteness, in whiteness is contained not blackness, and also not tartness, and also not this or that. They contain their own differentiation or their own negation.
Mm, mm. Okay,
What I,
then how does the universal contain its negation? I think is it right to say it contains its negation? Because in sense certainty we come to the universal through negation.
Yeah, good. And then you're saying that in perception, so in sense certainty we come to the universal through negation, and then in
And then the
perception
negation of negation. Yeah.
is in, or what I was going to say is, in sense certainty we come to the universal through negation. In perception, the negation is in the universal. Is that what you're
Yeah,
saying?
okay. I don't know if that's what I'm saying. In did you say in perception the negation is in the
you know,
universal? Yes. Well. Okay, that's what I'm saying. So it's the movement. The movement starts with the first negation, and then that negation is negated, and then we're using the before like sublated. So now we arrive at the beginning again, but it's different. It's had a blemish washed out. In sense certainty, that place where we arrive at, the universal, is now perception. We're now perceiving. So perception is of the universal, the here now, and it's of that.
I think sensation is of the here now. Perception is of the thing. Sensation or sense certainty starts off
Okay.
thinking it's not of being like the here now as singular immediate, but then it turns out to be about the here now as universals. But the universals come to be in perception a thing.
So that's I think that's where my lack is, I think. So there's something that happens at the end of sense certainty there where he's like the divine nature of language, which always says it's opposite, or like instantiates the opposite of what it tries to say, or this thing that you can't get at the meaning. The meaning is the particular thing. Like language can't get to the particular thing or object.
Yeah,
It says the universal and it's stuck to the universal. Then the universal of the universal that we get at is the pure relation of here now, or it's here now. So then what I was reading or am reading perception as is as before we get started in perception, the start of perception is the universal here now, the truth of sense certainty.
sure. I think that's right. Um, but so two things. One thing is the thing that is meant, the individual that we want to say in sense certainty but can't speak, that gets left behind. That's not a thing, just to point that out. And then the thing that comes to be in perception, what I'm suggesting, is thinghood as a universal or thingliness, whatever you want to call it.
Okay, okay,
So let's try and get that transition from here now to thing. Um,
yeah,
so here now is a universal. Um, let's get to this last paragraph. I think it's 110, somewhere at the bottom. Um, but if I want to help out language, which has the divine nature of directly reversing the meaning of what is said, of making it into something else, and thus not letting what is meant get into words at all, by pointing out this bit of paper, experience teaches me what the truth of sense certainty in fact is. I point it out as a here, which is a here of other heres, or it is in its own self a simple togetherness of many heres. It is a universal. I take it up then as it is in truth, and instead of knowing something immediate, I take the truth of it or perceive it. So I accept it. Then it goes to perception, right? That's where the transition is, both physically in the text and through what I'm going to suggest as the object. So immediate certainty does not take over the truth, for its truth is the universal, whereas certainty wants to apprehend this. Perception, on the other hand, takes what is present to it as a universal. So perception perceives something as being universal. It treats the thing that it perceives as universal. Just as universality is its principle in general, the immediately self-differentiating moments within perception are universal. I is a universal and the object is a universal. This principle has arisen for us, and therefore the way we take in perception is no longer something that just happens to us, like sense certainty. On the contrary, it is logically necessitated. So here's our first shift between sense certainty and perception. In sense certainty, something just happens to me, it's contingent, whereas in perception, it's logically necessitated. This is where I was making that distinction before we started recording about descriptive claims and prescriptive claims.
Mm.
Um, in sense certainty, something is, it just happens. In perception, it ought to be.
Yeah.
It's logically necessitated.
Yeah.
Getting there. Sorry, there's a long transition.
The okay, I'm wondering like um that it feels like there might be benefit like pausing on even if it's just my own lack, but I don't want to be selfish in that regard.
Go for it.
The there's a sense that I mean, is that not an arbitrary move to go from the way he gets to perception, and then now perception is over the universal, and then it's like there's a starting again in terms of saying what universal is.
It's the same universal.
It's it's a
It's the universal that is the result of sense certainty. And
universality is its principle, is the principle of perception.
yeah, okay.
The the universality of sense certainty
Mm.
is here now, but in perception it becomes a principle.
Yeah. And the reason it becomes a principle, I think, is sort of the next couple of lines. He talks about how the object is the same as the movement. Within the emergence of the principle, the two moments which in their appearing merely occur also come into being. One being the movement of pointing out, or the act of perceiving, the other being the same movement as a simple event or the object perceived. So, what I mean to say by that is, and why I think it's the same as what you're saying, is when we point out the here now, the act of pointing is the perceiving. Uh,
Mm.
Here, this is here, and then it passes away, and then it arises again. And that breaking up, that like momentary apprehension of it, of here,
Yeah,
is the perceiving, whereas here-ness itself is the object perceived, or the same movement as a simple event, is what he calls it in his weird technical terms. So it's a here now, but it's one which is both broken up and should be put together, right?
yeah,
The
that
universal,
togetherness. Yeah, yeah,
yeah, and it becomes so the universality becomes a principle by noticing that the pointing is a breaking up, and in order to have broken up, the thing must have been one, and then in order to be put back together, the thing should be one. But the normativity or the principle of universality that arises as a result of noticing that it should be universal. It's almost a tautology. The universal should be universal.
yeah. So this seems to be the move that I'm trying to track, and that I'm like there was that faint suspicion of arbitrariness, like, but I got a hunch that it's probably not arbitrary. That's why I'm like pushing into it. Like,
Can I also, before you continue, that the faint suspicion of arbitrariness, I don't want to say that this is happening for no reason, but I do want to point out a peculiarity of the first sections of sense certainty and of perception. We're just reaching normativity. we haven't even been able to argue. If you look at all the arguments for like the this and stuff
Yeah,
like that, they're
yeah,
not they're not really arguments, right? That's the trick here is they should kind of seem arbitrary. Like they just happen. Like all of the motions in thisness, like all of the motions in sense certainty. As soon as we say that they are deductive arguments or arguments in the traditional sense of like we can give reasons for them,
yeah.
stop being what they are. Like,
But-
sorry, just to interrupt and then we'll return to your thing. Like when we look at being, pure being, or this, and then Hegel at the beginning says it is because it is. Isn't that almost the most unphilosophical assertion you've ever heard? It just is because it is. But then if we try to say why it is, if we try to give a reason for it, like if we try to say like it is because something else, or it is because this happened, or it is because it's the nature of the thing, then it is not because it depends on something else. And then it
yeah,
isn't what it's supposed to be. So there's this weird way in which it seems arbitrary because we can't give reasons for it. But the way in which we can't give reasons for it, I think, at least in the way that I understand it, is that it's in the nature of the thing itself to disclose itself to us in that way.
yeah.
Although it doesn't help.
I'm trying to track that movement because the way I'm understanding is like the first action is like point. Then that logically necessitates the universal that we come to as the truth of uh sense certainty. Like the necessity of that seems to be an important piece. It's like the point which introduces the negativity or the negation. That's the first action. And then because of the negation, we then notice something about the thing that was pointed to, and then we can call it universal. We can understand it as that like the togetherness or the its its plurality.
Sorry, I've just seen this weird line here again.
Yeah.
I'm hoping that'll help. With the emergence of the principle, the two moments which in their appearing merely occur also come into being. The reason why that strikes me as strange is that in those two moments that happened, they just happened, and happening is part of sense certainty. They just happened, and now they come into being, or they are an emergence of a principle. They just happened, and then now they become this principle for us. And I think that's like the weirdness that you're pointing to. It's like the pointing just happens, and then we take the pointing to be indicative of a universal, and then we put the universal back together. But it is sort of arbitrary. Like the pointing, why should the pointing happen? Why should we posit that this pointing points at a universal? Like what makes us think that that becomes a standard by which to unite the act or the moments that were pointed to?
Okay. So there feels to be the logic in terms of coming to the universal of here and now. And I think that that's why I was really wanting to understand like the role of um negativity in terms of what something is. That
Mhm.
like what something is involves what it isn't, and that helps us get to the like the nature of universal, which is it was at least like unique to me in the in reading it, like this universality as a relation. It's putting it there in between the subject object, like it's the it's their pure relation. It's like an irreducible fact of relatedness. That's its universality. Um, then like the first time then that movement into now perception. If there's like a track of increased um activity, the so the end of sense certainty is to perceive is to take the truth of the thing. That taking is already like that's an activity. Like so you're ready to come into perception is to come into a new kind of activity. There's the pointing, logically necessitates the revelation of the truth of sense certainty. And then now to start perceiving is to take the truth of sense certainty. Now then, that taking the truth of sense certainty is now like where does the principle now how is it the principle of perception is universality, or uh, I'm glitching on that
Yeah, the
beginning
principle of
again. Yeah.
perception is universality.
Say again.
The principle of perception is universality.
Yeah. Well, okay. Maybe but why? Or like what? Um.
Can I just say the end of sense certainty, what you're calling the end of sense certainty,
Yeah.
is in fact sense certainty's end. Is where sense certainty
Yeah. Yeah.
ceases to be what it
Okay.
was.
Yeah. Okay.
It turns
But
out
like,
to be universality. It's not immediacy. It's no longer immediacy, and so it becomes universality. And so instead of our principle being immediate singularity, as it was at the beginning of sense certainty, a being that is because it is, an I that is because I am, or whatever, we come to a more developed thing. We come to a universal.
yeah.
The I as universal, take the now as day or whatever, and I stick to it. Or the now turns out to be a universal. It's not just now, but it's the space in which all nows exist, whatever, if you want to call it that. And so sense certainty in fulfilling itself turns out to be just a moment in the development of consciousness.
Yeah.
And the
Yeah.
second stage, what I'm suggesting is, and this is where the sort of arbitrary nature is we start treating stuff as universal. The principle is
Yeah.
universal. And it even says perception, on the other hand, takes what is present to it as a universal. He doesn't say
Yeah.
that what is present to perception is a universal. I'm sure he could have said that.
Well,
If he said what is present to perception is a universal, then the object that presents itself to us would be a universal. But what he
I
says
guess.
is perception, on the other hand, takes what is present to it as a universal. We treat it as a universal.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think this is what I've been pondering over. Like, it's that it's like I said, like it takes the truth, it takes the universal. So the end of sense certainty is also the beginning of perception, and they're the same. Like they're the same. It's the same. It's the same thing that has that difference. Like it's both the end of that movement and it's the start. That's the
Yeah. I need an analogy to help me here because it seems like they're the same, but they're different, right?
yeah. But at that, so I think this is a puzzle in development, and then in development might be the both analogy and like the literal thing, because uh maybe the word sublation might also come in here, like something 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 comes, like that framing of sublation as a cancel lifting. So there's a real canceling. There's a real canceling of the, like you said, like sense certainty ends. And then so like there's like there's a gap there, or there's something that happens there that is like like what, so now then the kind of image of, so we're getting this sense of like a grammar or a movement that reiterates, and then it, I guess, so then I'm feeling more convinced that like there really is like a simple movement or a gesture that reiterates through content. And then the puzzle is like, does the content do anything to that gesture? Like, does it change it?
I think it does. Like the negation in sense certainty was a negation that freed sense certainty from its mistakes, right? We in sense certainty takes the object to be a certain thing, and then the object turns out not to be that thing. Takes it to be particular, but it turns out to be universal. Then in perception, the negation no longer rids the object of something or the sense certainty of something. It is in the object, as Aviile tried to phrase it. I think as Aviile phrased it, like the negativity is in the universal. So it comes to be as like a it like takes this like lineage where like it removes itself and then it incorporates itself within this thing that's happening. And so now the negation is happening in the also or in thinghood or
Yeah.
in the properties of thinghood. And so
The
then
neg
these
yeah.
things are going to negate in their own ways amongst each other. And then, as I suggested, they're going to get us to force in the understanding, whatever that is. And negativity is going to display itself as force. And force, I don't understand the section on force at all, which is funny enough because it's the section on understanding and it's the one that you should understand. Um, but force is a negation that turns out to be no negation at all. It's a distinction that is not. Um, so positive electricity and negative electricity, I think, is this example. Um, and then electricity is. But when
Yeah.
we try to define it via forces, it becomes positive electricity and negative electricity. And both of these are electricity, but they are not
Yeah.
electricity. And so the distinction between positive electricity and negative electricity is no distinction at all. And so then so like it's like if we followed, I wish I had like a diagram to draw this with. If we followed like a line, so negation would first be like a line. It would just be like this thing, and then it would like fold in on itself and then become incorporated into the thing in perception in thinghood. And then this sort of negation would interact amongst itself. And then it would somehow shoot out of itself into something else, and in doing so, return to itself.
Somehow shoot out of itself.
Yeah,
This
I don't
is
know how.
this is this is so much fun.
Yeah, it like
Exact,
it transcends its own limits, and in self transcending itself, it incorporates
exact,
its self transcendence. And
Wait,
then
exact.
just to point to the last one before we go. So it ejects itself out and then returns to itself. But you can already see what the ejection and self return is. It's a sort of self consciousness. It it is not itself and it is itself, and so it is both what it is and is not what it is, and recognizes both of those aspects of itself as being fundamental to itself. I would imagine. Like, this seems
you
to be how the movement wants to run.
you should be arrested for talking like this.
So, what is it a crime
Exact.
against?
Uh, sure.
What am I being charged with?
Corrupted.
Um, like false gods, false gods.
Crimes against thought.
Crimes against thought. Oh man, but that was smooth. Sure.
But yeah, like so I think the the negation develops itself. And I think I just want to dwell on the arbitrary character that you were talking about at the beginning of perception, right? So the guy that I've been watching who's going to be my future lecturer at some point, Winfield, talks about this a lot. Hegel's phenomenology we saw at the beginning has to be assumptionless. Philosophy is a science of being. It can't assume the being that it knows. It can't assume the knowing that it knows. It can't take for granted anything. But in doing so, it has to sort of have its reason within itself. It's sort of a self-determining. And so, of course, it seems sort of arbitrary because we can't give a reason for why it ends up being the way it is. It
Yeah,
is the reason it ends up being the way it is. Sense certainty is the reason that perception perceives.
yeah, yeah. So I think the we get through sense certainty the first universal, and then you can say from this first universal what a universal is. So there's like a and that's where that language of like medium or pure relation or um that so basic togetherness. But then I guess the question still persists as to how um what is that? Because perception takes the universal, then how does perception, or is it perception that is saying the universal is this like manner of medium or relation and not just here now? Like what takes it away from that specific content of the first universal into universal as such?
I can't answer you. I agree with you.
Yeah.
I understand the question. I understand the problem. Like the universality shifts in what it means. It goes
Yeah,
from
yeah, oh, okay. That's perfect language, like what it means. Because what
yeah,
it means is what we couldn't get in sense certainty. And then you
exactly,
were saying that that's what we're trying to get in perception, the
or what we
particular,
should get.
what we should get.
Yeah, I'm not sure
Oh,
that
that's
we.
it. Oh, so you're saying perception. You're saying things exist as should, like they should exist. So that's the only
Yeah,
move that perception can make is that it's like an ought. So,
yeah, that's
so
what I
I
was saying.
move.
That's what the transitions are. The transitions are from an is to an ought, and then the understanding is the confusing one. An ought that is.
Okay. Uh. Oh, okay. But okay. How does that move happen?
Yeah, that's 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 the one. That's the one that I'm stuck on. So I mean, I'm stuck on all of them to be honest. In perception, we are greeted with the thing, and the thing is a universal in a particular way. It's a one. Um, and a oneness somehow has this ability to contain its own negation or its own otherness, whatever you want to call it. Then, not only, so the thing is the unity of perception. The act of pointing is the perceiving or the eye, and the thing is the perception as a simple event. It's those moments that we've broken up in our perceiving, but as they are together, right? And so we go from this one that is a one by itself, the salt that is taut, also white, also cubical, to the consciousness of these moments at separate parts. So the salt that appears white and appears cubical and tastes salty, not simultaneously, but successively. Our apprehension of its successor. I think Hegel's just assuming that as well. Well, not assuming that, Hegel is just stating that. Like we don't see and taste the salt at the same time. We see the salt, then we taste the salt. And so that gap, if you want to call it, between the sight of the salt and the taste of the salt, the whiteness and the tartness, is a breaking up of the one. We transition from the one to the broken up one. And in transitioning from the one to the broken up one, we've transitioned from the object to the subject, or from the being to the knowing. And then the knower realizes that there's a sort of deception, right? The the tautness is not the sweet the whiteness or the cubicalness. But in it not being the whiteness or the cubicalness, it also should be that whiteness and the cubicalness. Like the whiteness
Ah,
and the cubicalness existed in one thing. We saw the salt, and then it was white, and then we put it on our tongue, and then it was salty. But then this whiteness and this saltness, on this whiteness and this tartness are no longer in the salt. They're in me. The salt, but then the salt is in me, isn't it? So we have to correct our apprehension of it and realize that what our body, the universal medium, apparently, we'll pause to talk about that a little bit because the fuck. The universal medium that is our body breaks the stuff up, and then we somehow realize that we need to put it back together into a many less one or simple
or
salt.
so that's where the should comes in for you, like but it's like, but the should, I'm just hearing it now more in the terms of like that same kind of logical necessitating, because it's like it is in one thing, then it's broken up, and then but because it was one, so it should be one, and then we get to that alsoness, this reappearing of the universal in terms of the also. Like the universal is of the object as the also.
So it's an also when it's just the salt. The salt is an also in the fact that it's like a plenum that has whiteness and tartness, and so it's white and also tart and also cubical, right?
Mm.
It's an also in that the tartness comes to be in me and also the whiteness comes to be in me. And then it's an also, there's like three iterations of the also that like happens. Like when I put it back together, the salt is again white and also tart and also cubical, or it should be white and also tart and also cubical.
Yeah, that second one is where the should be comes in. It seems to be like what, why is it um uh before it's broken up, why is it that it is also? Does the also appear or does it?
The alsoness is it's having the qualities of tartness and whiteness, because whiteness is not tartness and tartness is not whiteness, but they
Okay,
coexist in the salt. So the salt is the also, which lends itself to having not whiteness and whiteness, or tartness and whiteness in the same space,
sure.
so to speak.
So, but how do we? Where's the move from the universal?
Mm.
Okay, because we made a principle, and then now we're putting it into things. We're saying that there's a principle in the thing that's universal, and that's what I'm
Well, the salt
perceiving.
is a here and now. It's a particular here, and it happens at a particular now. It
Okay,
occupies a space and a time. Salt exists, whatever you
yeah,
want to say.
salt.
Yeah.
But
And
in language, it's going to universalize that.
yeah. So we're not just saying this salt or whatever, but we somehow are saying both. We're saying salt in general and also this salt is white, also tart, also cubical. And then we ingest the salt, and then there's so many universals here. The salt is a universal in terms of its object. It has a universality to it. It should be a certain way. It should contain these properties. Then my body as a universal medium, again, I just keep bringing us back to that because I think it's very peculiar.
Yeah,
Body
yeah,
as the universal medium is universal in that it doesn't take any of these particular qualities only. It takes the saltiness, it takes the tartness, it takes the cubicalness. Like I'm receiving these things. I am the universal that holds these properties that are contradictory together, right? And then I break them apart so that they can be together in me. And then I notice that in me, they should reflect something that is outside me or that is in the object. The salt. The whiteness and the tartness and stuff should also be what salt is. Like I I see this thing, right? The salt. It's white. Then I put it on my tongue and it's tart. And then as I put it on my tongue, the tartness appears and the whiteness disappears, right? I don't see the salt anymore. I just taste the tartness and I associate it with this whiteness that was. And then somehow, I want to say in the concept, but I think it's the wrong idea. In the perception of it, the whiteness and the saltiness, I put those two back together. I start to associate them. But I don't only associate it with the salt that is the salt, the salt that I just put on my tongue. When I perceive again another piece of salt, I go, ah, salty, whatever, ah, tart, ah, white, ah, cubical. And then sometimes I get it wrong. Like I get my coffee cup, put my coffee down, I pick up the sugar jar and or I pick up the salt jar and I pour in 2 spoons. I stir it up and I'm expecting tartness, whatever. I'm expecting whatever. And then I take a sip and it's sweet. And I go, what? That's not what salt does, right? Or that's not what salt is supposed to do. Salt isn't supposed to be sweet, so it can't be salt. But like there's a moment like so all of the salt examples, we're assuming that we get it right. I think the trick to seeing Hegel's move here is to think about the time when we get it wrong. Like when you season your chicken with sugar, or when you
Okay,
sweeten your coffee with salt. Like there's moments that we get it wrong.
yeah,
And those
yeah,
moments really highlight that I mean, this is dogmatic, and I shouldn't be saying this as a philosopher. Even if it wasn't correct, it just happens so often that it must be correct. You know what I mean? Like this is the most empirical inference that I can make as a philosopher. But like, even if Hegel was talking utter rubbish, the fact that this happens in everyday life to such an extent that it does seems to just confirm the weird principle that's being asserted here. Like, not only do I see things as a one and then put them back together after seeing them as a one. I also mistake things and then I put them back together. And by putting them back together, I exclude other things. Like when I put the salt in my coffee cup and I drink it and I go, that's not salt. What I'm doing is asserting something about the nature of salt and asserting something about the nature of, I guess, sugar or whatever its opposite is. Like I'm putting it into a relationship with other concepts and making like I'm making claims for the first time. Like how crazy is that? Sorry, I don't know how to get the wildness of it out.
Is the that point about the mistake being the point of relevance or importance, like the um is how would you relate that to the mistake of pointing in sense certainty? Like, is that where the negativity comes in? It's like that that my universal perception fails me. That like
So
newness
in
or
sense certainty, it's a bit more important, and I think it's a bit more important because he uses the pointing as the or the mistaking as the means to show us the true nature of nowness. So
mm,
there it is like a tool almost for the account to develop. Here, it's not really needed, right? Like I don't have to mistake the salt. It's just an interesting supplement. It's like a
yeah,
complementarity rather than like a completion. Like I
yeah.
don't have to mistake the salt, but I think that the account becomes more compelling when we think about what happens when we mistake the salt. So like
Or
you were
that
saying,
we can
yeah,
mistake ourselves.
and even in that mistaking, there's a correction already happening, right? Like in the recognition that the mistake is a mistake, we come to realize that it's incorrect. And so part of us realizes that we must have gotten something about the salt wrong. So it's a
Yeah.
correct.
I I don't know if it's a nothing direction, but is there like a significance to that we can get it wrong? Like sense certainty we can't get here now wrong.
Yeah, that's the
Uh,
normative dimension. Like
okay.
that's what I've been trying to point out, that like in perception we start making claims. Like in sense certainty, all we could really say was this.
Yeah.
We're like a babbling idiot, just saying this. You know, the really annoying kid. But
I kind of want to bloom there. There's a
yeah,
I think like it's a I've thought it a few times, but I understand the method of Vipassana, which is insight meditation, to be like taking you to sense certainty and then saying like stay there. Um, the in that psychology, that's meant to be like the deepest root of the mind. So all these things that get set up with expectations and failed expectations and later levels of mind are rooted out in some way by just coming to now, here, now, this,
yeah.
this.
There's a strange, like, this is not relevant to the talk at all. There's a strange section in the Science of Logic where Hegel talks about the Brahman. And I think he says that like the Brahmin sits and just says Om and concentrates on his nose. And then like the sort of argument against him is that he does nothing. Is that he just sits there going Om, 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 Om.
Um,
Isn't that the most
um,
unintelligible babble you've heard? Like in some sense, like he's grasped being, he's grasped a form of being, the sense certainty form of being. I think it happens in the beginning chapter, which is on being, pure being. And the Brahmin is supposed to be sitting there contemplating pure being and doing so by just saying Om and focusing on the current moment and the happenings that like are here and now.
yeah, yeah,
But Hegel's weird dialectical move is to notice that in doing that, he's not doing anything. Like he turns out to
yeah,
be, and I mean, this is two different psychologies. Like
yeah.
Hegel takes, I think the return to sense certainty happens here. Like we are forced to be in sense certainty in the phenomenology, but as a means to an end rather than an end in itself.
Yeah, this is this is where I'm wondering about like this the
I'm not saying
nature
he's
of the
right. also.
uh, the nature of the development in the text, like um
Well,
uh
one way to think about it, sorry to interrupt, is just like, so in that beginning section, we have the this of uncertainty that we start off with, which is a particular immediate singular thing. And then eventually he calls it the irrational or the indeterminate. So like what the person is doing that sits there going, or more like trying to be here now all the time is just trying to contemplate the irrational. But trying to contemplate the irrational is by its very nature irrational. And so it's not the appropriate activity for us to do. Like rationality, I don't even know, we're not at reason yet, so I shouldn't be using this term. Consciousness develops itself out of this. Like we all outgrow Buddhas. We were kids that just used to babble and just go this at one stage in our lives. I'm just playing devil's advocate here, guys.
yeah,
But
yeah,
now we've outgrown that consciousness. We have debates. We argue about whether the salt should be sweet or not. I don't know, some stupid thing. Not only that, we argue about force and the understanding. We argue about laws of nature, gravity, and we start attributing these weird ways in which nature acts and behaves. Like we not only make normative claims, we make law-like claims, which is the next stage of the development, and ought that is. And then
yeah,
later,
yeah,
I mean, I don't know if Hegel keeps throwing in little ethical jibes at the end of these very dense theoretical sections. Um, like that section where all the animals eat up nature because they know that it is not.
yeah,
Like, what's that about? He just throws it in there. Then at the end of this section on the understanding, he talks about how like standard self-conscious, like standard sound understanding mistakes itself when it tries to use this certain like thing. And then in Force and the Understanding, he throws in this weird inverted world where punishment is for us immediately bad, like we punish someone, but in the inverted world, we take punishment to be good. Like punishment is what we're supposed to do to someone that's done a bad act. And it's not meant to be bad for them, it's meant to be good.
yeah,
But it is bad, it hurts them. Like we're not
yeah,
saying pain is good. And so in this
yeah.
weird inverted ethical world, the pain is good because it's not actually pain. It's like retribution or like it's repairing the person's soul. Whatever.
Restoration, yeah, yeah,
Yeah, it's restoration. It's not actually damaging or harming. Harm
yeah,
becomes not harmful in the inverted world.
yeah.
And then like
Christianity, right?
yeah, I don't know, the inverted world example is just very fun and interesting. Um,
Yeah,
and then somehow we have to like unite the two or like we have to like bring them together or recognize that like it doesn't make sense to have that. It's an inverted world. It's a world
so,
where black is white, dark is light. Like he has this weird, he throws in all these weird things. And what I'm saying is not that they're, what I'm trying to say, and probably doing a very bad job of, is not perhaps that they're random or that he's just trying to prove his point in several domains at once. But I think just as he's pointing out a unity of being and knowing, to point out that unity to being and knowing, thinking and being, is to also simultaneously point to a unity between the theoretical and the practical, right? The practical is it's an activity, it's what we do. And thinking is an activity. And so it's theory is practice,
mm,
right? Like it becomes an activity that thinks itself or is knowable. It's the same situation that we have going on in like self-consciousness. It is a
yeah,
kind of activity, and the activity that it is intelligible.
yeah. I'm thinking about Marx and Zizek, and but I'm loving your animation, and I'm appreciating that framing as descriptive and then into ought and then into the ought that is. That's an
That's the
interesting move.
strange one, right? The
Yeah.
ought that is. Isn't I don't know what the analytic problem is, but the analytic problem that's been brought up to me or just said as an objection to whenever I started talking about Kant was that you can't derive an ought from an is. Like there's that is
Yeah.
form. But sure, perhaps you can't
No,
arrive
wasn't
at
that
sorry, yeah.
say? No, I thought it was the other way around. You can't arrive at an is from an ought. Is that's the move that Hegel's doing?
I think so. Or rather he's showing that like the is turns out to be an ought, and the ought turns out to be something that
Ah,
is.
yeah, yeah. That's probably that's it. That's the move. It's like it turns out to be. It's not like that. Like the progression of the thought in this book is like, oh, it turns out to be, and then it turns out to be. It's like, yeah, which
Yeah.
is this peculiarity that we're thinking like, where's the well, I guess that's the framing of the phenomenology. Like he's saying, like experience. I'm starting from experience. This is experience. This is what happens in experience, and then it's meant to turn out in a direction.
I think he describes the project of the phenomenology in the preface that we read as consciousness reaching its own experience of itself, or something like that. Spirit, I think, is the word. Spirit will turn out to
Okay,
reach its own experience of itself.
we
And
did
so it's
that.
like
Yeah, yeah.
experience is a peculiar term in Hegel. Like experience for
Mm,
Kant is either like an appeasement of sensation, so like it's an excitement of sensation by a thing, like you have
mm,
experience, or it's a sort of empirical knowledge. So like experience, I experienced this. But for
mm.
Hegel, I think he even says it in the first section on sense certainty. It's the experience is the tracing of the moments of the history of sense certainty. So it's like we're playing out the history and then we're tracing it, and the playing out and tracing is the experience. So like when we point,
Yeah,
we
yeah,
start talking about the this, and we realize that this is not this, but it also is not this. That's the
yeah.
experience. It's not like it doesn't have anything to do with like anything. I don't
An
know.
experience. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, it's
It's a,
like
yeah.
his definition of experience is peculiar unto itself, and so thus the phenomenology of spirit, whatever you want to call it, what I want to suggest this text is, and why I have such trouble arguing for the things that I like to argue, is either a means to that self experience, or in the activity that doing the phenomenology of spirit is that experience. What I'm suggesting is that by interacting with the text or by doing the activity that is the phenomenologizing, we are coming to a self experience of spirit.
Mm. Yeah, that's quite a sale.
I
The
don't know how to argue for it or who I'd
yet
be arguing
yet.
against. I think this is probably not like appropriate for the recording, like setting of this, but it happened in my master's at some point. I think at some point in the second chapter on my master's thesis of the critique of pure reason, I basically just said you have to read the book. Like, I was like,
Yeah,
the critique
yeah.
of pure reason is an activity, and you have to be doing the activity to get the point. Like,
Well, yeah. This is the bonus material for whatever strange soul has sat through this and listened with us.
sorry, Seapo.
Read the book. Then maybe join us.
When
The
I'm sure he will.
sure. Are we
But
feeling yeah.
before we come to a close, I imagine the other difficulty, and the difficulty that we're going to continue to struggle with, especially in both making the material clear to others and to ourselves, is that by saying that this is the means or is itself the experience of spirit coming to know itself, what we're getting is a lot of aha moments. Like Daniel, I think for Daniel, the clearest aha moment has been uh, the this or the now and the pointing at the now. And that's a aha moment. The difficulty, once we realize that now is a universal or that this thing must be a certain way, is retracing the steps to get there. Because the result is meaningless without the steps to get there. Like when we just say now, or even if we just say now is universal, it means nothing, I think. Or it's very difficult to grasp what it means. It's, in Dimple's words, a bit esoteric. And
Yeah.
so, in order to stop being or to avoid being esoteric, which is not a bad thing, I don't think, um, I think part of what's nice about having you guys here and what will play itself out is retracing those steps and then coming to that result by itself. Because there's this weird passage in the introduction where Hegel explains that it's not the means or the end, but the means and the end. And what I took it to mean is that the phenomenology of spirit, it's not about the destination, but about the journey. But it's not just about the journey, it's about the journey and the destination. So
Yeah.
we need both the journey and the destination to see both how we got there and where we're going.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's my that desire for tracing the movement was like why I think I've just like really trying to get that sense certainty or like what happens there in that movement. And then I have the sense that there's a basic there's like a grammar and I want to get a sense of like the nature of the movement and I have a sense that that reiterates. And then my open question is like the um does something new become revealed? And like that's kind of the framing that was coming in the introduction is like, do we do anything to the absolute by doing this? I mean, like the by
To, to anticipate an answer to that and to recall one of our questions from the first session. When we were doing the first session, we were like C4 and all of us came to the conclusion that like there must be a unity between being and knowing. And like, yeah, of course there must be, right? There has to be. And like we all could say that, but that didn't really mean anything. It was just an empty word.
yeah
And now through this first attempt to get through consciousness, whatever that means, we have seen that play out.
yes
That has envisaged itself in certain forms. It's envisaged its form in the here and now, and where we've got up to today. I would think it's envisaged its form in the one or in the object, the salt, and that salt is going to develop into the law. So we're seeing it. We're seeing that iterative move develop itself. Like we're seeing new things pop up all the time,
yeah
um,
and that
and be
the
incorporated and deepened.
my like hope money bias is that that point that fact of the shareable nature that the tracing is shared and that meaning comes in the fact of it being shared. That that that's the relevant thing. I think that's I mean, just looking at the titles of the chapter, I think there's religion that that's shareable. So that like this and it's communable over. It's deeply shareable. But
Yeah, I have
what I
no
just
idea
said
what's going
now
to happen.
had little meaning. Yeah.
I have no idea what's going to happen there.
Yeah.
I have I've read up to like very badly. I read up to the end of self-consciousness because I was like, I'm forcing myself to just push through and trudge through this book. Um,
Wow. No, thank you for your efforts. Yeah, like I was still combing that uncertainty of the
I think the
so
difficulty with this book and why I've decided to traverse into the depths is that it's easy to get caught up running around in circles. Um, there's a lot of content, but sometimes sometimes being further along in the journey helps you look back in a more productive way. Like
Yeah.
For example, the
Yeah.
one that we kept returning to is the main point of contact of being and knowing as self-consciousness. Seeing that for me and seeing how that played out allowed me retrospectively to reconceptualize the function of the chapters in consciousness and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. And
um,
is that advice that we were given in terms of reading a philosophical text? Like you read it once through and then but then it's kind of like, okay, where's the section that I stopped to read once through? And yeah, I mean these kind of practice points
mm,
I think are important and interesting in themselves, like how to go about it. I
yeah,
think
I think
I've
sometimes
heard, yeah.
like for me, I've just had a tendency to err on the side of caution and like to just read the same passage over and over again. But then I
Mm,
realized nothing's changed in my reading of it, and like I'm just like hitting my head against a wall or something. So I just need to like run up a front of the forward, and then like look back, and then eventually it'll happen. Because again, just to share a personal thing for those weird people that watch at the end, people, like when I was working through the masters, like I got caught up on
Sibo.
transcendental aesthetic for so long in Kant. Like I could read the
Uh,
introduction to the Critique of Pure Reason probably forever. And I was like, I'm just never
yeah,
gonna write this thesis. So like never gonna finish the book. I'm never gonna know what it's about. I'm never gonna get past this introduction. And so too with this, like I've been reading this. I think I started this text with Larry last year in June or something. Like just after finishing my master's, I was like, Larry, I'm gonna go to this university and I'm gonna do a doctorate on Hegel and I'm gonna read the phenomenology of spirit and it's gonna be sick. Um, and then I started reading it and I got past the preface and then I got past sense certainty and then life got in the way and then I didn't touch it again
mm,
until like the end of the last reading group. And now I'm just like, I mean, I've kept on picking it up in between, but it's just the preface or the introduction or sense certainty or the preface or the introduction or sense certainty or any of those in any particular combination. And I've just been playing with those three. And now it's just like, I'm probably going to have to write essays. So I should probably read the with a bad motivation. But like at some point, you just need to move on, you know?
yeah,
It's the
yeah,
same. It's the same as it's the person saying or this. You could say it probably forever,
yeah, yeah.
but you probably should move on at some point.
I don't know. I don't know.
I have no clue.
Sure.
How are you feeling about coming to a close? Shall we
I'm
close the recording?
I'm feeling good. I really should close this though, I think. Or not an ought, but
Yeah, that's good. How are you there?
Um, I'm terrible at conclusions. Um,
yeah.
I have a teensy bit of a question.
Oh
Uh,
no.
I'll hold on to my question then.
Yes,
No,
Uh,
no, please
end on
ask,
the
please ask.
question, I'll be there.
Please ask.
it's not even a question. It's weird. The text so far seems to me like, okay, pick your fighter. We pick this. The stage is a sense perception. We unlock universality. I don't know if you can hear me. We
Yeah.
unlock universality. Uh, we unlock universality as a principle. We move to stage perception. It seems to me we unlock abstraction, and from abstraction, sort of move into the next stage. But I don't know if I sort of plop abstraction in the little perception there. But I think it helps me make sense of the second footing, the thing that we split up, because it comes to us via universality. We look at it really closely. We see all these different things about it, it splits up. And then something happens and we recognize, hey man, we should put it back together. We put it back together, but something happens to the thing that's put back together, as Hadley said. It stays with us. And that sort of forms the basis of a concept which we will get to in the third part. But I want to put abstraction in, and therefore I do not have a question, but merely a king of fighters type situation.
Bring in abstraction. So I think were you saying sage? Like the sage?
No, did I?
Like the sage of sense certainty was like the thing that we got was the universal.
Stage. So it's
Sage.
like you're playing a game, a beat 'em up game. So the
Okay.
stage is sense perception. You pick your fighter, you fight
Stage.
and
Stage.
then you unlock universality. Great. Now you've got universality as your principle and off to the next stage, perception.
Yeah. Yeah.
What's the before we end? What's the feeling on it of being like a fighting game? Like, is it good that it's a fighting game? Is it bad? Neutral? Just is a fighting
Struggle, sorrow. So on my end, I am fighting through the text to get the little bit I have.
like the picking of the fighters. Like, why pick sense certainty to begin with? Do you think we could have just opened the book at like, or like, why does Hegel pick sensation? I'm just gonna call it sensation. Why does Hegel pick sensation to start with? Like, could we just have opened up to reason? Like, can we work back from reason, sensation? Or like, is there like something that like gets lost behind?
I think something does get lost because the way I understood the introduction is we're trying to find something, we're trying to find out about knowing, but we're trying to know something particular about and ourselves as knowers. That was a really long time ago. So in doing that, we need to sort of begin where we begin. We're knowing things through the things we come to via our senses and perception. So I think it's the most natural place to start. I didn't even think about it. Maybe I should have.
Yeah. But yeah, I think Dan and I have the like natural aversion that like starting with this, like, I mean, he has an argument for it in the science of logic, I guess, but also in this, the phenomenology of spirit. You got to start with pure being, or even at the beginning of sense certainty. What's the weird? He introduces it weirdly. He says, let me get to it. The knowledge or knowing which is at the start or is immediately our object cannot be anything else but immediate knowledge itself, a knowledge of the immediate or of what simply is. It just says it. Just has to be. It's immediate. What else could it be?
Yeah. Yeah.
We can't change anything in it. It just is. And that's how we start.
That's epic. I mean, I'm pretty content with that. So what have you been doing? That's it.
We begin by beginning. And I guess we
So
end by ending.
Is this where we say ciao?